Some people are born to belong to the land, but Elise Moreau, she was born for the sea. From the windswept shores of Brittany, France, a little girl stood for hours watching the waves crash against jagged rocks. While other children played with dolls, Elise traced the outlines of orcas in her school notebooks. She dreamed of them, black and white giants gliding through endless blue. To her, they weren't just animals. They were mystery, majesty, something bigger than life itself. When she was 19, she left home, with nothing but a suitcase, a heart full of hope, and a promise to herself. She crossed the ocean to America. Her goal? To work with the very creatures that had haunted her dreams. It wasn't glamorous at first. She scrubbed tanks until her hands blistered. She thawed buckets of fish at dawn. And for years, she watched from the sidelines, quiet and patient, while senior trainers commanded the spotlight. But there was something different about Elise. She didn't just watch the animals. She listened. "Did you see the way she looked at Kayla?" One trainer whispered. "She sees things we don't," another replied softly. And it was true. Elise had an uncanny ability to read body language, not just of humans, but of orcas. She could sense moods before they showed, hear a rhythm in their breath, feel a shift in their energy before anyone else noticed. By the time she turned 34, Elise was no longer the quiet intern. She was the lead trainer at BlueSea Sanctuary, a marine park perched along the cliffs of Santa Cruz, California. To the public, she was a star. Children held up signs with her name scrawled in bright colors. Tourists whispered when she passed by, "That's her. That's Elise." But all the applause, all the attention, was nothing compared to the connection she had with one animal. Kayla. Kayla was massive, 22 feet long, weighing over 8,000 pounds. Her black and white form cut through the pool like a living blade. And yet, when Elise was near, she moved with startling gentleness. "Up, girl," Elise would call softly, and Kayla would glide forward, lifting Elise carefully onto her rostrum, holding her above the water like a fragile toy. The crowd always gasped. Cameras flashed. For those watching, it was pure magic. A woman and a predator, moving as one. But what the crowd didn't see was the history in Kayla's eyes. She wasn't born here. She didn't grow up in the safety of a family pod. No. Kayla had been ripped from the freezing waters of the wild as a calf, torn from her mother during a violent capture off the coast of Kamchatka. Her screams had echoed across the ocean as speedboats circled. Nets dragged her from everything she knew. And though she had been trained to perform, though she obeyed commands and accepted fish from human hands, the wild was still inside her, silent, waiting. Elise knew Kayla's story. She'd read every file, watched every video, listened to every old trainer's account, but she believed something different. "She's misunderstood," Elise told a colleague one night, leaning against the tank as Kayla floated silently beneath the water. "You really trust her that much?" the colleague asked. Elise smiled faintly. "I do. I trust her with my life." And for years, that trust felt unbreakable. Elise created new routines designed to showcase Kayla's intelligence. She spent hours outside public shows, just being with her, talking softly, tossing enrichment toys, listening to the whale's deep rumbling calls. She swore Kayla responded to her voice more than any signal or whistle. "Elise doesn't train Kayla," another trainer once said. "They speak the same language. But even the strongest bonds have cracks." It was during a quiet rehearsal that Elise noticed it. Just a flicker, a pause. Kayla hesitated before a simple cue. Her usually sharp, focused eyes seemed distant. "You okay, girl?" Elise asked, crouching at the edge of the platform. Kayla didn't answer. She just floated there, unmoving, her pectoral fins twitching ever so slightly. Then, without warning, she slapped her massive tail against the water, hard enough to drench the platform and send a sharp wave over Elise's feet. The sound was so loud it echoed off the stadium walls. For a split second, Elise froze. She stared at the giant creature before her heart pounding. "Guess someone's feeling playful today," she said with a light laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. When Kayla finally moved away, Elise exhaled slowly, brushing her damp hair back. The knot in her stomach stayed. She felt something, a shift she couldn't quite name. Later that night, while the rest of the staff clocked out, Elise stayed behind. She stood by the pool watching Kayla glide in endless circles under the dim lights. For a moment, their eyes met, and there was something in Kayla's gaze she hadn't seen before, something she didn't want to believe. But Elise smiled anyway. Because after 10 years of working with giants, what could possibly go wrong? And yet deep beneath the surface, the first ripple of something darker had already begun. Some dangers don't announce themselves with roars or teeth. Sometimes they whisper quietly just beneath the surface. Kayla was no ordinary whale. She had not been born into the soft hum of filtered tank water or the comfort of a captive pod. She came from the wild, from the freezing waters off Kamchatka, where her family hunted together, where her mother's call echoed through endless blue. And one day, it was gone. Speedboats cut through the waves, nets dropped like traps from the sky, and Kayla was ripped from her world. They called it a collection, but for Kayla, it was the first betrayal. Years later, she lived in a world of concrete walls and predictable routines. To the crowds, she was a star. To the park, she was an asset. But inside her massive, intelligent mind, something was still restless. The trainers noticed it in small ways. "She refused lunch today," one of them said, flipping through the logbook. "Again," another frowned. "Third time this week." Kayla had days where she wouldn't eat, days when she floated listlessly at the bottom of the pool, ignoring whistles and hand signals. And sometimes she would lunge unexpectedly, not at a person, but at the tank wall or the gates, just enough to make the water tremble. The reports were there, quiet warnings filed in neat, clinical language. Exhibited unresponsive behavior during session. Displayed agitation after show. Recommend observation. But to Elise, Kayla wasn't dangerous. She was misunderstood. "Everyone has bad days," Elise said one evening as she dried her hair, still smelling faintly of salt and fish. A younger trainer, James, looked uneasy. "But what if it's more than that? What if she's holding it in?" Elise shook her head gently. "Kayla just needs patience. Trust. She's been through more than any of us can imagine, but she's not like the others. She listens to me." And for a while it seemed true. Then came the missed cue. It was during a small daytime show, nothing special, just a weekday crowd of families and tourists. Elise stood on the platform, signaling Kayla for a simple breach. Normally, Kayla would rise from the water like a bullet of black and white, sending a perfect splash that drenched the front rows. But this time, she didn't. Kayla swam in a slow, eerie circle, her dorsal fins slicing through the surface. Her eyes, those deep, glassy eyes, didn't lock onto Elise like they usually did. They drifted, unfocused. "Come on, girl," Elise called softly, raising her arm again. Still nothing. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Parents whispered to their kids. Trainers backstage exchanged nervous looks. Finally, Kayla surfaced, but instead of positioning herself for the next trick, she just hovered there, close enough for Elise to reach out and touch her rostrum. "She's just tired," Elise said with a light laugh, forcing a smile as she glanced at the staff nearby. But before anyone could respond, Kayla lifted her massive tail high and slammed it down with thunderous force. The entire platform shook. A wave crashed over Elise's boots. Gasps rippled through the audience. "What was that?" a little boy shouted from the stands. "Part of the show?" someone else asked uncertainly. Elise froze for a fraction of a second. She knew that wasn't part of the routine. She could feel it, a spark of something unsteady in Kayla's movement. But she hid it with a smile, waving her hand to reassure the crowd. "She's feeling playful today," she said, her voice just a touch too light. After the show, as the trainers gathered by the holding gate, James spoke quietly. "Elise, that wasn't normal. She was just off rhythm," Elise replied, her tone firm, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of doubt. James didn't look convinced. "What if it's more than that?" "It's not," she insisted, glancing toward the pool where Kayla now floated motionless. "I know her. She wouldn't hurt me." But that night, long after the spectators left and the park went silent, Elise stayed behind. She walked to the edge of the tank, kneeling close enough to see Kayla's shape gliding in slow, restless loops. For a moment, Kayla surfaced, her breath breaking the silence. Their eyes met, one human, one wild, and Elise felt something she couldn't explain. A weight, a question. Was this trust, or was it the calm before a storm? She pressed her hand gently to the glass. "We're okay, girl," she whispered. But deep inside, the unease lingered. And the next time Kayla hesitated, it wouldn't end with just a splash. Sometimes a single moment shatters everything you thought was safe. Sometimes the water doesn't just reflect the sky, it reflects blood. It was June 12th, the BlueSea Sanctuary's 10-year anniversary show. The stadium was packed, every seat filled. Over 800 spectators leaned forward in excitement. Children clutched souvenirs. Parents held up phones to record the grand finale. Bright music echoed, blending with the rhythmic splashes of trained dolphins in the smaller pools nearby. And then Kayla appeared. She was enormous, her black and white body glinting under the afternoon sun. She sliced through the water like living steel. The crowd gasped in awe as she surfaced, her blowhole releasing a sharp burst of mist. On the platform, Elise Moreau adjusted her headset and smiled. She was dressed in her signature black wetsuit, the one with the silver stripe that made her easy to spot in the water. Her voice came over the loudspeakers, calm and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "you are about to see a bond built on trust, love, and years of patience. Watch closely." The crowd cheered. This was the act everyone came for. The finale. The moment Kayla would lift Elise high above the water on her rostrum, balancing her like a living platform before gently lowering her back to safety. Elise knelt at the pool's edge and gave the hand signal. "Come on, girl," she whispered. "Let's show them." But Kayla didn't move. She hovered near the middle of the pool, motionless, her eyes fixed on Elise. For a long second, it was as if the entire sanctuary held its breath. Elise gave the signal again. Still nothing. The music kept playing. The audience shifted uncomfortably. And then Kayla moved, but not toward the platform. She turned slowly, almost lazily, then suddenly lunged forward with terrifying speed. The impact was brutal. Kayla's massive body slammed into the platform edge, sending a shock wave of water over Elise. She stumbled, arms flailing, before being knocked into the pool with a splash that echoed through the stadium. The crowd gasped, and then laughed nervously. They thought it was part of the show. "Elise!" one trainer on deck shouted, his voice tight. Beneath the surface, Elise opened her eyes. Kayla's shadow loomed over her, darker than the water itself. And then, the jaws closed. She felt the sharp pressure first, then the searing pain. Kayla's teeth clamped down on her arm with a force that shattered bone instantly. Bubbles and blood burst around her. When they surfaced, the truth hit. Elise screamed. Not the kind of theatrical scream for a crowd. This was raw, panicked. It cut through the music like glass shattering. "Help!" she gasped. But before the word was finished, Kayla yanked her back down. The water turned red. The audience fell silent. Then the first terrified cries began. "Mama, is she okay?" A child's voice trembled. "Is this part of it?" Someone whispered. On deck, the other trainers froze. For years they'd been trained to stay calm. But this wasn't a routine misstep. This was a predator in full control. "Deploy the nets," one trainer shouted. "Get the boy now," another yelled. Kayla surfaced again, dragging Elise with her. The trainer's face was pale, eyes wide, mouth open, as she gasped for air. "Kayla, stop!" Elise choked, her voice barely audible. But Kayla didn't stop. She flipped, twisted, and with a violent thrash, rammed Elise against the side of the pool. The crack of impact was loud enough to make people in the stands scream. "She's killing her," a woman shouted. Security scrambled to clear the front rows. Children cried hysterically. Phones fell from shaking hands. Underwater, Elise's lungs burned. She fought for the surface, but Kayla's grip was relentless. The whale's eyes were cold, distant, unreadable. When Elise surfaced again, she tried to speak. "Help!" That was all she managed. Kayla struck again, harder. This time she clamped on Elise's leg and dragged her deeper. Blood spiraled upward like ribbons in the water. The crowd could see it now, bright crimson against the blue. Trainers on deck blew emergency whistles, a shrill sound meant to distract, but Kayla ignored them. "She's not responding," someone shouted. "Try the underwater deterrent." A high-pitched tone reverberated through the tank, a last resort sound meant to make the whale release. But instead of letting go, Kayla went still. She hovered at the bottom, holding Elise like a broken toy. The seconds dragged on like hours. When Kayla finally let go, Elise floated upward, limp, motionless. The stadium went silent. Then Kayla surfaced one last time. She nudged Elise's body gently, almost like she was confused. And then she backed away, sinking into the pool's depths. "Get her out, now!" a trainer screamed. Two men jumped onto the platform with poles and nets, pulling Elise toward the edge. As they lifted her out, her head lolled back. Her wetsuit was torn, blood streaming from deep gashes. Paramedics rushed forward. CPR began instantly. But for many in the crowd, it was already clear. The woman they had just seen smiling, waving, trusting this giant animal, was gone. As sirens wailed outside the sanctuary, the only sound inside was the soft lapping of the blood-stained water. And from beneath the surface, Kayla watched, silent, still. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something the sanctuary had always feared but never wanted to admit. The bond was broken, and the water would never look the same. There are moments when the world seems to stop breathing, when even sound feels wrong because it knows what just happened can never be undone. For 15 endless minutes, Kayla held on. Trainers blew whistles until their lungs burned. Emergency nets dropped into the pool, but tangled and failed. They tried everything, slapping the water, throwing distraction toys, even using sonic deterrents, but Kayla was locked in a place no one could reach. And then, as suddenly as it began, she let go. Elise's body drifted upward, limp and broken, a trail of crimson blooming through the once clear water. The cheers, the laughter, the music, all of it had vanished. In the stands, hundreds of faces stared in stunned silence. A child whispered, "Mommy, why isn't she moving?" On the platform, two trainers knelt, their hands shaking as they pulled Elise from the water. Her torn wetsuit clung to her pale skin. Deep lacerations carved across her arm and leg. Someone pressed on her chest, counting out compressions, but there was no response, no breath. "Come on, Elise, come back," one trainer muttered through tears. But there was nothing left to come back. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as paramedics rushed in. Security cleared the stadium, guiding sobbing families toward the exits. The bright afternoon sunlight suddenly felt harsh, cruel, unforgiving. And Kayla, she floated in the center of the pool, unmoving. Her massive body swayed gently with the current she created herself. She didn't vocalize, she didn't thrash. She just stared. To the untrained eyes, she looked calm. But to those who understood, it was something else entirely. It was the silence of a creature who had reached her breaking point. By evening, the news had already spread. Footage of the attack replayed on every major channel. Headlines screamed across the world, "Trainer killed by beloved Orca." Family show turns to tragedy. Did the sanctuary ignore the warning signs? The questions came fast, and for the first time, the sanctuary couldn't hide. Whispers became evidence. Leaked reports revealed what many had long suspected. Kayla had a history of unpredictable behavior. Trainers had filed complaints. Veterinarians had documented her stress. Safety recommendations had been ignored. "Why didn't anyone stop this?" a grieving coworker asked quietly during an interview. "Because she was too valuable," another answered, his voice hollow. Outside the gates of BlueSea Sanctuary, the protests began. Animal rights activists held signs that read, "Captivity kills." Crowds chanted Elise's name. Vigils were held at night, candles flickering in the darkness. Lawmakers called for hearings. Talk shows debated endlessly. Should orcas be in tanks at all? Were these accidents inevitable? And in the middle of it all was Kayla, the killer whale who was both villain and victim. She was moved into an isolation tank. The same gates she once glided through freely were now locked. Trainers no longer entered the water with her. There were no more shows, no music, no applause. Just the quiet hum of filters and the hollow echo of water slapping concrete. At night, one janitor said he saw her floating at the surface, staring at the empty stadium seats where Elise once stood. "She didn't move for hours," he whispered. "It was like she was waiting for someone who would never come back." And Elise? She became more than a trainer. She became a symbol. Her picture appeared on news broadcasts, in articles, on memorial walls. People spoke of her smile, her calm presence, her belief in the bond between humans and these giant predators. But now, her story carried a warning, one that couldn't be ignored anymore. No matter how much love we pour into captivity, no matter how carefully we build trust, the wild can't be erased. Elise's parents stood at a press conference days later, holding her torn wetsuit. Her mother's voice shook as she said, she loved Kayla. She loved them all. But she also trusted the system to keep her safe. And it failed her. The sanctuary released a statement. "We are heartbroken by this loss. Elise was family. Kayla will never perform again. But the damage was already done. Ticket sales plummeted. Lawmakers pushed new bans on orca breeding and performances. One by one, other parks began to feel the ripple. Kayla stayed in her tank for years after. She was never released, never returned to the wild she once knew. She remained a prisoner of her own history. Some called her a monster, others called her a martyr. But the truth was simpler. She was a wild heart that could never truly belong to anyone. Elise's memorial was placed at the entrance of BlueSea Sanctuary. A simple bronze plaque that read, "She gave her life for what she loved." But as visitors passed it, they couldn't help but look at the silent pool beyond and wonder, was this love? Or was it just a beautiful illusion we forced upon something we could never control? Because no matter how deep the bond seemed, some wild hearts cannot be tamed. And with Elise's story carved into history, the world began to ask a haunting question. If this could happen to her, how many more must fall before we finally let them go? And so, Elise's story ends not in triumph, but in silence. A silence that forces us to face a truth we've hidden behind smiles, shows, and applause. Kayla wasn't a monster. She was a prisoner, a wild creature forced into a life she was never meant to live. And Elise, she was a woman who gave her heart to that same illusion, believing love could erase captivity. But in the end, the ocean always remembers. What do you think? Should orcas like Kayla live in tanks for our entertainment, or do they deserve to be free, even if freedom means never seeing them up close again? Tell us in the comments below, because every voice matters. If this story moved you, please share it, so more people can see what really happens behind the glass. And remember, not every bond we build is meant to last.